Okay, Odyssey books 9, 10, 11, 12. Let's jump in. Book 9 starts with Psychons, Lotus Eaters, and Cyclops. This is where all of books 9 through 12 are Odysseus telling his story. Um, and they're all very episodic. He goes to one place, has an adventure, goes to another place, has an adventure, and that's pretty much all 4 books. The characters in this book, of course, Odysseus. It's his story now. We've got the Psychons. There's 2 different battles with the Psychons and Odysseus's men. The Lotus Eaters are the ones that once Odysseus's men ate the lotus plant, they didn't want to leave. Polyphemus is the king of Cyclops. He is the one that Odysseus injures, and because Polyphemus is Poseidon's son and he prays to Poseidon for help, that's why Odysseus had such a hard time getting home. He spent years and years and years getting home. A lot of that time is spent on Calypso's island because of the way he acted when he was dealing with Polyphemus. He could have avoided that whole thing. We'll get to that. And then I'm sure you are aware, No Man is Odysseus. He just tells Polyphemus that his name is No Man. And when Polyphemus, is like, hey, somebody's attacking me, he says, who is it? It's No Man. And they're like, No Man is attacking you? Well, then you're crazy. Because if no one's attacking you, then why are you calling for help? Right. So in any case, all right. So a couple things in each chapter we want to talk about. So the objective narrator thing we've talked about before. Is there any judgment from the narrator when he's telling the story? And a lot of times there isn't. Here it almost seems like there is. Let's read through this paragraph and try to pick out things where we might say, oh, that's not very good. Why is he doing that? And then try to figure out, is there judgment from the narrator? Okay. Or does the narrator just say, here are the facts and you make your own judgments? So Odysseus says, when I had set sail then, the wind took me first to Ismarus, which is the city of the Cycons. There I sacked the town and put the people to the sword. We took their wives and also much booty, which of course means treasure, which we divided equitably amongst us so that none might have reason to complain. I then said that we had better make off at once, but my men very foolishly would not obey me. So they stayed there, drinking much wine and killing great numbers of sheep and oxen on the seashore. Meanwhile, the Cycons cried out for help to other Cycons who lived inland. There were more in number and stronger. These were more in number, and they were more skilled in the art of war, for they could fight either from chariots or on foot as the occasion served. And later on, it says the Cycons got the better of us, and we lost half a dozen men from every ship we had. So we got away with those that were left. Okay, so there's one thing in there that's kind of hidden that if you read it quickly, you might miss it. But it said, we sacked the town, we put the people to the sword, we took their wives, and then took all their money. When it says we took their wives, it could be that they were actually taking slaves. That certainly happened. It's probably more likely that they were raping women, right? They were killing the men, raping the women, taking the stuff. And you might think, well, this is a hero of the story. He's not supposed to do these kinds of things. Again, we have to look at the historical context. It's not that it was okay. It certainly was accepted as something that happened when you went on adventures and that sort of thing. And the way it's written here, at least in the words that are used, is very doesn't bring a lot of attention to it. It just says, here's what we did, and then it moves on. Now, you could argue that, oh, well, the instant result of doing that was that they were attacked and they got beat pretty badly. A dozen men got killed, that kind of thing. So maybe the narrator is trying to show, or at least the storyteller is trying to show, like when you do immoral bad things, that maybe bad things happen to you. So that is a way of storytelling, kind of a moral argument. I would argue, however, if you were going to do that, it should be we did this to them and then they did this to us. Here it says that I said we had better make off at once, but my men very foolishly would not obey me. So we stayed there, and because of that, that's why we got attacked. So that really takes away any moral judgment about what Odysseus and his men did to the Cicons early on. Um, and if you're feeling kind of like, well, I don't like this hero, because he's doing those sorts of things, that's perfectly reasonable. When you read a book, you have to look at it with your own moral standards. And if things have changed, then it's important to recognize that, hey, that's they may have accepted it back then, but this makes me not like this guy more now. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to like the hero of the story. It was written a long time ago. That wouldn't have probably made people very upset when they read that, but it certainly might now. So, but I would argue that this is still relatively objective, that the narrator's not trying to have any moral judgment. The narrator's not trying to tell us this is good or bad. He's just saying, here's what happened. So, and then the same thing happens with the Cyclops episode. Although this one is probably, the way it's written is certainly objective. The fact that what Odysseus does get him into trouble. It seems like it's a natural consequence, and it seems like it's not necessarily a moral judgment, like don't do this because the plot is purposely making something happen to him. It's like, well, he makes fun of the Cyclops. Of course, the Cyclops is going to try to destroy him, and then he does it again, and then it happens again. Well, that's a natural progression. So it's not that don't do bad things. It's that, hey, when you do something, there are reactions to it. So and we can get into. I believe I have a quote once we get into that, and you'll see the writing is still very matter of fact. Here's what Cyclops did. Here's what Odysseus did. So if there is a moral to the story, it certainly is not indicated in the writing. Right? Okay, that's enough of that. There is one metaphor. You don't see a lot of these, but certainly, and I don't know that this probably wasn't intended at all. But certainly you can't look at the Lotus Eaters and not think of drugs, right? When they had eaten and drunk, I sent two of my company to see what manner of men the people of the place might be, and they had a third man under them. They started at once and went among the Lotus Eaters, who did them no hurt, but gave them to eat of the lotus, which was so delicious that those who ate of it left off caring about home and did not even want to go back and say what had happened to them, but were for staying and munching lotus with the Lotus Eaters without thinking further of the return. Nevertheless, though they whipped bitterly, I forced them back to the ships and made them fast under the benches. So here they are giving something to consume that makes them not only want more and more and more, but makes them not care about anything and just want to hang out there and just enjoy everything and not worry about anything. If that doesn't sound like drugs, I don't know what does. Now, again, I don't know that this was on purpose. I don't know that there were those kind of drugs, way back in the day. I'm sure there were equivalents, but I don't know if that's what they were thinking about. But it certainly makes us think, oh, yeah, that has the same effect. That's very interesting. So, okay. And, obviously I pointed out some of the imperfections of Odysseus already, so we're not going to rehash that. But that's not the only time that he does things that are very questionable. When he is visiting the Cyclops, the only reason he goes there is he's curious. He's like, I want to know what these monsters are. Are they really that horrible? And I also want to ask them for a gift, because the whole hospitality thing, when someone comes to visit you, you have to give them a gift. So he wants a gift from the Cyclops. And when his men saw him, like take the cheese and all this, and they saw what was going on in the Cyclops lair, my men begged me to let them first steal some cheeses and make off with them to the ship. They would then return, drive down the lambs and the kids. That's not kids as in people, it's kids as in goats. Put them on board and sail away with them. It would have been indeed better if we had done so, but I would not listen to them, for I wanted to see the owner himself in the hope that he might give me a present. When, however, we saw him, my poor men found him ill to deal with. That's putting it lightly. And we'll get to that. But, okay, well, here's Odysseus doing the same thing his men did. He told his men, we got to go. Otherwise, we're going to have problems with these Cyclons. And sure enough, they had problems with Cyclons. Well, now it's totally flipped. The men are like, let's just take everything and leave. And Odysseus is like, no, we got to stay. I want to see this. It's quite selfish, right? And because of that selfishness, some of his men die, right? So he's not perfect. And then once we get to, we already talked about this, but let's look at the quote. When they were actually finally escaping, he has so much pride that he just can't help himself. And it says, then when we had got as far out as my voice would reach, I began to jeer at the Cyclops. Cyclops, I said, you should have taken better measure of your man before eating up his comrades in your cave. You wretch, eat up your visitors in your own house. You might have known that your sin would find you out. And now Zeus and the other gods have punished you. So this is a little bit of hubris. He's assuming that the gods are on his side and that they're working for him and that they're against the Cyclops. It's almost the opposite, because Poseidon, has all this hatred towards Odysseus now because of what he did. He got more and more furious as he heard me, so he tore the top from off a high mountain and flung it just in front of the ship. So if they are here, the Cyclops is over here, throws a boulder that lands here, which creates a wave and pushes the boat back towards the Cyclops. The sea quaked as a rock fell into it, and the wash of the wave it raised carried us back towards the mainland and forced us towards the shore. Luckily, they rowed fast enough and they got out of there. When we had got twice as far as before, I was for jeering at the Cyclops again, but the men begged and prayed me to hold my tongue, but I would not listen to them. This has already happened once, right? It's one thing if you won't listen one time, but he already got into trouble, and he's so arrogant that he's like, no, and he can't help but no, I have to just have the final word and say something. And it happens again. The guy ripped the top off a mountain and was able to almost kill them. I mean, if it had landed a little bit closer, they all would have died. But he does it again, and again, the rock almost hits them. So certainly, Odysseus has some issues. He's got some flaws that almost destroy them. Another thing that I've noticed in this chapter is there really is not a lot of emotion. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen. There's people that die. There's people crying. But there's not a lot of emotion when it comes to the reader. At least this is my personal opinion. First of all, and I think there's a lot of reasons for this. First of all, the whole thing is very episodic. So we go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. And it does not leave a lot of room for emotions. It doesn't slow down and have a moment where everybody's kind of hanging out and chatting. When that happens, it's like at banquets, and that's not even moments of emotion. It's more just look at these, epic feasts that we have, right? So it's also quite quick. Things move on very, very quickly before you can even get into the emotions. There's so many characters. Does anyone even remember Antiphus? Right? Probably not. One, because they don't even mention his name as he's dying in the cave. His name was mentioned in like chapter 2, when it was just briefly mentioned that this guy, older guy's son, was named Antiphus was killed with Odysseus in the cave. So, but you got all these characters like, oh, there's this guy, there's this guy, there's this guy, he died. And it just kind of moves on so quickly, you can't keep track of everyone. So and maybe pathos isn't the point. Would it be stronger if we cared more about the characters? That's usually the case. Um, and the graphic violence, is so shocking sometimes that you don't even think about what's actually happening. You're just like, oh, wow, that's brutal. Um, but then you forget, no, that's actually a person that just got his, arm ripped off or something. And the narration is so matter of fact, like this happened and this happened and this happened. There's very little, and of course this is a translation of a poem, so we don't know exactly how it was narrated, but the narrators are very good about keeping the translators as close to the original as possible. So, all right, so I'm going to give you an example of all of these things. This is a very graphic scene. So and I know there's usually a couple students every year that, are sensitive to the graphic kind of stuff. So if that's you just mute it, let it go until the question comes up. And I will make sure I do not ask a question about this particular quote. Well, you can still read the quote, right? So, okay, maybe I will. All right, so the cruel wretch, this is Polyphemus, the Cyclops, vouchsafed me not one word of answer, but with a sudden clutch he gripped up two of my men at once and dashed them upon the ground as though they had been puppies. I don't know how they treat puppies back in the day. That is so sad. Well, okay. If you have too many puppies and you don't want them, they either drown them or just do that. So that was back in the day. And the earth was wet with their blood. Their brains were shed upon the ground. That's very graphic. Then he tore them limb from limb and supped on them. He gobbled them up like a lion in the wilderness, flesh, bones, bone marrow, and entrails, without leaving anything uneaten. As for us, we wept and lifted up our hands to heaven on seeing such a horrid sight, for we did not know what else to do. But when the Cyclops had filled his huge paunch and had washed down the meal of human flesh with a drink of neat milk, he stretched himself full length upon the ground among his sheep and went to sleep. So there is a moment in here that's supposed to be somewhat emotional. We wept and lifted up our hands to heaven, seeing this horrid sight. But that's it, and then it quickly moves on, and it's like, it's so graphic, dashing upon the ground, and then ripping their limbs off, and then eating them. Like that's so shocking and so incredibly horrifying that you don't even notice. Wait, that's an actual human that's happening to. You don't know the names of the people it's happening to. It seems that the epic is much more focused on just the action and the ooh, look what happened. Oh, look what happened. Oh, that's cool. It's a monster. Instead of getting emotions out of people, instead of developing characters, which it's not necessarily even a complaint. It's just what it is, right? Okay. That was book 9. I'm not going to spend quite as much time on books 10, 11, and 12, but there were a lot of things I did want to mention in book 9. Then we get to Aeolus, the Latrigonians, and Circe. Aeolus is the one that gives Odysseus a wind in a sack, and his men open it up, and it blows him back to where he was, so it's totally worthless. Latrigonians, and they're not all ogres, but some of them are humans, some are ogres. Ogres are the ones that like eat them. And then Circe is the goddess who turns Odysseus' men into pigs. Eurylochus, however you want it. He's the one that leads the men to see Circe. Hermes shows up for 2 seconds out of nowhere. So if that doesn't tell you that the gods are watching out, that this is almost a Deus Ex Machina. There's no way Odysseus would have survived unless Hermes just shows up and is like, hey, do this and this and this and this. And then Elpenor is kind of strange. This random guy just falls off the roof and breaks his neck. And I don't know. I think the only reason for that is when they go to hell and then following chapter, all of a sudden, hey, it's Elpenor. Wait a second. Weren't you back at the cabin? What happened to you? Oh, I fell off the roof. Now I'm in hell. Okay, so maybe a little bit of humor there, although that's pretty dark. Okay, so I mean, this should be obvious at this point, right? What is the most important heroic quality? Is it bravery? Is it manly man, slicing and dicing? Like, what exactly is it? Well, no, it's having the gods on your side. Like, none of the other stuff matters at all. Even Odysseus would not have made it home without the help of the gods, right? It says, the vilest of mankind get you gone at once. This is Aeolus. Out of the island, him who heaven hates, I in no wise help. If the gods decide that they're not going to help you, everyone knows it. They're like, oh, you have such bad luck. Nope, don't come anywhere near me because if I help you, the gods are going to punish me. So it's not just that the gods directly punish you, nobody wants to interact with you either. So that's pretty interesting. When I got through the charmed grove and was near the great house of the enchantress Circe, I met Mercury uh, with his golden wand, or Hermes. Um, there's no way he defeats. I mean, his men just got completely destroyed. Um, Not literally killed, but they got defeated by Circe instantly, and she's going to do the exact same thing to him. And there's no way he would have avoided it unless the gods like him and want him to survive, right? And then when when he meets, Hermes tells him what to do. You must make her swear solemnly by all the blessed gods that she will plot no further mischief against you, or else, when she has got you naked, she will unman you and make you fit for nothing. She'll, you know, cut off one of your limbs, let's say. And, that's not the point. It's kind of funny. I think that humor is there on purpose. But the point is, look what he actually does when he gets there. He says to Circe, and now that you have got me here myself, you mean me mischief when you ask me to go to bed with you and will unman me and make me fit for nothing. I shall certainly not consent to go to bed with you unless you will first take your solemn oath to plot no further harm against me. And so she swore at once, as I had told her. And when she had completed her oath, I went to bed with her. That brings up another point, which we'll get to in a second. But notice that Odysseus does exactly like word for word. And this is almost just copy and pasted paragraph, right? Mischief against you, mischief against fit for nothing, fit for nothing. So, like, he knows this is one of his best qualities. He knows exactly what to do. It's follow what the gods tell you to do to a T. Now, of course, this brings up the double standard, right? So, I'm sure some people are asking, like, wait a second, Mr. Kramer. Why is it that here's Penelope at home with these suitors? There's dozens of them, and she's like fending them off, and she could have any of them, right? Her pick, and yet here she is being this loyal wife, being perfectly pushing them away and all this kind of stuff, keeping them at arm's length. And here's her husband going around. I mean, we don't know exactly what he was doing with the Psychons, but it suggested that he might have been part of that. And then here is no question he is sleeping with, a goddess. Total double standard. How's that possible, Mr. Kramer? Isn't that a double standard? Yeah. That is a double standard. It's the same answer I have. It's probably very unsatisfying, but different times. Not that there aren't double standards nowadays, but it's a narrator that is just telling us what he did. Is not having any moral judgment, so we're not going to get that. Um, is there an argument that he had to do that in order to get home? Sure, you could argue that if you want to. Do I think it's okay? Well, no. By today's standards, absolutely not. He shouldn't be doing that. And so, why are we reading about heroes? Well, this is historical document, right? This is what um, the heroes are like. These are archetypal heroes would do things like this. And that changed over the years. Once we get to like King Arthur, all of a sudden there's a whole new standard that heroes are supposed to act, right? Chivalry and all that. So that it certainly changes over time, which is good too. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. So okay, book 11, the whole thing takes place in hell. Um, And there's a lot of characters, but I'm going to go through only a few of them. So Tiresias, and you might think, wait a second, wasn't Tiresias from uh, King Oedipus? And yeah, it actually says the Theban prophet Tiresias. So yeah, it's the exact same person, and he's the one that Odysseus has to talk to first. Otherwise, he's not going to get what he needs. He's not going to get the information he needs. Uh, Anticlea is his mother, who was alive when he left to go fight the Trojan War and died in the meantime. We'll get into more of her in a second. And then all of the ghosts. There's so many. There's so many ghosts. Wow, there's so many ghosts. Like, oh man, the list goes on and on and on. Right. Okay, so in this chapter, it's just more of the same stuff. You got to obey the gods. I mean, I will say this. I didn't find this particularly emotional, but certainly, I mean, he can't talk to his own mother, not even for a little. He can't even say anything. She died, and like, can you imagine how much you see your mom who died? You want to say something, but he can't because he has to obey the gods. Um, and again, it moves through that so quickly that there's really not a lot of emotion there when it really should be an extremely emotional scene. If this was a film, they would make a big emotional thing out of it, right? Then came the ghost of my dead mother, Anticlea. I had left her alive when I set out for Troy, and was moved to tears when I saw her. Wow, I didn't capitalize that I. But even so, for all my sorrow, I would not let her come near the blood till I asked my questions of Tiresias. It's what he has to. That's what part of what makes him heroic is that he's able to fight back, these instincts of wanting to talk to his mom. Uh, and then the epic list of ghosts that just goes on and on and on. Wow, there's so many ghosts. So more of the same. And you might be thinking, Mr. Kramer, I was kind of interested the fact that he was going to hell, but man, that was really boring. Like he literally goes to some beach on a river, gets some blood, and just looks at ghosts and talks to a guy. Like, shouldn't hell be more interesting? This is a different version of hell, right? This is the Greek mythology kind of version of hell. So it's not this like big punishing play. Like some of it is, but there's different parts of hell. There's parts of hell that are amazing, like this different levels of hell. So there are certainly versions, like depictions of the Odyssey, that show hell more interesting, but it's not necessarily true to the book, right? The one I find most interesting, of course, is the Simpsons version, um, mostly because it's funny. I'm going home. Which way do you think of?
It's not so easy. You must go through Hades, crossing the river Styx.
Oh, this truly is hell. Yeah. So, does anyone remember the band Styx? So it's spelled the river Styx is spelled Styx, right? And there was a band in the 60s, 70s called Styx, and that song in the background was that band playing. And so that was Circe there, right? That you have to go through the river Styx. So that's probably the most interesting version I've ever seen of this. There you go. Everybody's rocking out to Styx. Okay. So finally, we get to some more. It's not finally because we've already had exciting adventures, but we get to some more of exciting adventures. This is finally the last chapter. We start with the sirens. These are the enchantresses, the goddesses that, like, I don't know if they're goddesses, but you know, they're super ugly and horrible, but they appear to be amazing, right? And they enchant men with their singing. This is kind of a stereotype, to be honest. This idea of the tricky woman who uses her sexuality to lure men and then kill them, destroy them, kind of thing. So it's kind of a sexist stereotype, to be honest. Um, but when someone says, "Oh, when you hear the siren call," that means that it's something that's so enticing. But beware, watch out. There's something horrible. It's actually a monster that's calling you. Scylla has 12 feet, 6 necks, a head, and each neck has a head with 3 rows of teeth and they come out and they snatch you up. They all come out at once and they snatch you up and eat you. And then the Charybdis is the whirlpool of death. It doesn't really describe it having a ton of teeth, but every depiction of it I've seen, does. They're supposed to only have to go through one of these two trials, but they end up doing both because, it's more exciting. Hyperion, of course, is the sun god, and you'll remember that this was mentioned very early on in the text. That's how basically all of Odysseus' men die except for him. Don't mess with his cattle, right? And then Eurylochus, convinces the crew to eat the cattle of the sun god. So he's the one, that gets involved with that. Okay, so instead, there's not a lot to talk about here. It's mostly just adventure plot. And let's be clear, like, that's the whole book is supposed to be just this really fun adventure. So there's not supposed to be a ton of analysis of that kind of thing. There's just things that modern readers and critics will look at and go, oh, that's interesting. Let's talk about that. But I thought for this chapter, let's just look at some different depictions of the two monsters. So we'll start with the Scylla. And some of these are taken from video games or Magic the Gathering or something. I don't even know. Movies, artist depictions. So if you're like, hey, that's from a video game I play, yeah, well, that's what happens when you use Wikipedia. But here we go. So it is supposed to be like a female. That's why you have the female, well, the person there. And then the bones, that's kind of interesting idea that these are all dead already. This is very typical, with there's the 3 rows of teeth. Ooh, these have a couple different eyes. That's kind of fun, right? The necks are supposed to stretch farther than that. That doesn't look like that would reach very far, but I love the old-timey depictions because they're very much human, but just with it just a little bit. Where's all the heads? Oh, there they are at the bottom. It looks like just like dogs trying to escape or something. But okay. And she's like, "What's up? High five." All right. So this one's from some kind of game card. Scylla the Huntress, Attacker and God. Interesting. This one shows much more of the female form, and a lot of the other ones are just mostly the little arms that come out and attack. She's got a little weapon here too. That's like it's a trident. Interesting. This reminds me a lot of Ursula from The Little Mermaid because she looks like an octopus and the eel. Those things look like those eels. But anyway, cool art. And then we get to the Charybdis. Some of these I think are so cool, and I love like just how massive it looks compared to the boat, right? Like it looks like the boat has no chance. Now here it's not so much a waterfall as an actual like monster coming out of the ground, and that's pretty typical. But man, that looks so cool. I really like this one. This is like, ooh, the whirlpool is just hiding what's actually underneath. It almost looks like an alien ship, right? And there's a little bit of the teeth there. But again, it shows how massive it is compared to the boat. That one's cool. A lot of times you see the tentacles coming up, which again I don't think was ever mentioned in the book. But that's pretty typical. The Release the Kraken is kind of like the Charybdis. And then here, yeah, just the massive size of it. And now it kind of combines all of it, the teeth and the whirlpool and the tentacles, how big it is. So, all right. Well, that's cool. All right, a couple more. Probably release one more on Friday. We'll go through 6 chapters because, again, a lot of plot, not a lot to discuss, a little bit. And then the last one next week for finals week, and then that'll be it. Probably do a survey if I can get it out. Thanks for listening, everybody.